The great hall of the Galactic Summit was filled with voices from 100 worlds. The air shimmered with the soft hum of translation fields and the glow of floating light orbs. The long table at the center curved in a perfect arc, and behind it sat the council members in their ceremonial robes. The banners of the Galactic Union swayed gently above them, showing the colors and symbols of each member planet. Daniel stood at the far end of the hall, trying to keep his expression calm. He was here as the representative of Earth, and after months of tense talks, he was close to sealing a trade and security agreement with Orvana, one of the most powerful members of the Union. This was not just another diplomatic mission for him. This treaty would open the way for Earth to join the Galactic Union and secure its place among the stars. Orvanan delegates were tall, with pale silver skin that caught the light like polished metal. Their eyes glimmered faintly and their voices were musical. In tone, Daniel had learned to keep up with their slow, measured way of speaking. It was a style that demanded patience and careful choice of words. The leader of the Orvanan delegation, Elder Chiron, was about to sign the agreement when a sudden movement caught everyone's attention. A young Orvanan woman stepped forward from the gathered crowd. Her steps were confident and her gaze fixed firmly on Daniel. Her hair flowed like liquid silver over her shoulders, and the long, deep blue robes she wore made her seem both graceful and unyielding. She stopped in front of Daniel, and without hesitation, spoke in a voice that carried across the hall. "Human, under the authority of Galactic Union Law 472b, you are required to enter into marriage with me for the treaty to be valid." The room fell silent. Daniel blinked for a moment, unsure if he had heard her correctly. He looked at Elder Chiron, who simply nodded as if the woman's words were both expected and binding. This must be some misunderstanding. Daniel thought marriage was not part of any agreement he had been shown. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think there may be a mistake," he said. "My role here is to complete a trade deal, not a wedding arrangement." The woman straightened her back and spoke again. "There is no mistake. My name is Lyra, and as the eldest daughter of House Varen, it is my duty to unite our house with yours for the sake of the alliance. By our laws, your signature on the treaty alone is not enough. This union must be sealed by blood and bond. Without it, the agreement has no standing in the eyes of the Union." Daniel felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. He could see a few council members exchange quiet words in their own languages. The faint hum of the translation fields filled the silence. His mind raced. Marriage to an alien he had just met was not exactly in the training manuals for Earth diplomats. Before he could form another protest, Lyra raised her hand, signaling she had more to say. "And that is not all," she continued. "The law requires that in situations involving divided clans, the representative must marry all direct heirs of the house, not only the eldest." Daniel's eyes widened. The words sank in slowly, as if they needed extra time to make sense. "All heirs?" he asked with cautious disbelief. Lyra gave a small nod. "You must marry my sisters as well, Arya and Nira. Together we represent 3 branches of our house. If even one is excluded, the alliance is considered void." The hall murmured with interest. Some seemed amused, others shocked, and a few simply curious. Elder Chiron finally spoke. "It is true, Ambassador Daniel. Law 472b was created after the War of the 4 Clans on Orvana. It was meant to ensure that peace would last by binding all leading houses through shared bonds. In our history, such unions have prevented countless conflicts. Your marriage will serve as a living bridge between our worlds." Daniel ran a hand over his face, trying to keep his composure. This was no small request. It was not just about personal choice. The fate of Earth's place in the Union rested on his answer. The Council was watching. Rival delegates from other planets were also watching. Some of them would be all too happy to see Earth fail and lose its chance. Lyra stood calm and certain. There was no trace of hesitation in her silver eyes. She seemed to carry not just her own will, but the weight of her people's expectations. Arya and Nira were not in the hall yet. Lyra explained that they were completing ceremonial duties in the Orvanan capital and would arrive soon. Daniel felt trapped between logic and duty. Refusal could mean years of lost negotiations. Acceptance meant stepping into a life he could never have imagined. The law sounded ancient, strange, and deeply rooted in traditions he barely understood. The council waited for his words. But Daniel knew better than to answer immediately. He asked for the chance to review the details and speak privately with Lyra. The request was granted, and the session was suspended. Lyra led him to a side chamber, away from the echoing voices of the summit halls. The chamber was lined with tall, crystalline pillars that glowed faintly with shifting colors. Daniel sat at a low table while Lyra stood across from him. Her tone softened. "You think this is only about marriage, but it is about survival. The clans of Urvana are proud and cautious. Only a bond like this can convince them that Earth is not just another voice in the Union, but a partner worth trusting. My sisters will not be strangers to you. Each has a role in our world, and together we speak for the heart of Urvana." Daniel listened, but his thoughts were still tangled. How could he accept such a life-altering decision in the middle of a diplomatic mission? He had trained for difficult negotiations and unexpected turns, but nothing in his career had prepared him for this. Lyra seemed to sense his hesitation. She said quietly, "I understand the weight of this choice, but know this: refusing will not only end the treaty, it will signal to the Union that Earth cannot adapt to the customs of its allies. In the void between stars, adaptation is survival." Daniel sat in silence. For a long moment, the soft light from the pillars cast shifting patterns across the walls and floor. Somewhere beyond the walls, the murmur of the summit continued. The decision before him was no longer just personal, it was planetary, and as Lyra watched him with steady eyes, he began to realize that the path ahead would be far stranger than anything he had imagined when he left Earth. The next day began under the towering crystal arches of the Urvanan reception hall. Light from the twin suns spilled through the high windows, turning the walls into waves of gold and silver. Daniel stood near the center, surrounded by banners of the Galactic Union and the deep blue sigils of House Varen. The air carried a faint scent of spiced airfruit, and the low hum of ceremonial music played from unseen instruments. Delegates from many worlds had gathered, curious to witness the meeting of Earth's ambassador and the remaining heirs of the Urvanan house. Lyra entered first, dressed in the same flowing blue robes, but today she wore a silver circlet across her brow. Her gaze met Daniel's for only a moment before she turned toward the great doors. They opened with a slow, graceful motion, revealing two more Urvanan women. Each moved with a style of her own, yet they both carried the same shimmering skin and faintly glowing eyes as Lyra. The first was Arya, taller than Lyra, with long hair braided in intricate patterns. She walked with a calm, steady pace, and her expression was composed, like one who weighed every thought before speaking. Her robes were pale white, edged with silver markings. Daniel sensed she was a thinker, perhaps someone who valued knowledge and logic. Above all, the second was Nira, shorter than her sisters, but with a presence that seemed to fill the room. Her hair was left loose, flowing like molten metal, and her robe was dark crimson with black trim. Her eyes sparkled not with calmness, but with a kind of playful challenge. She glanced at Daniel as if already judging whether he was worth her time or not. As the three sisters stood together, the crowd murmured softly, some in approval, some in doubt. Elder Chiron stepped forward and raised his voice so all could hear. "This is the moment required by Law 472b. The representative of Earth must acknowledge each heir and agree to the union, or the treaty will fail." Daniel swallowed hard. The weight of the moment pressed against him. Lyra's words from the previous day echoed in his mind. Arya stepped closer and spoke first. Her voice was gentle yet precise. "I am Arya, second heir of House Varen. My duty is to preserve the wisdom of our people and ensure our history is honored. If you are to be joined with me, you must value truth and learning above pride or haste." Nira followed without waiting for formality. "I am Nira, third heir of House Varen. My duty is to protect our borders and challenge threats wherever they rise. If you are to be joined with me, You must be ready to face danger. Without hiding behind titles or treaties, Daniel stood still, hearing the balance in their words. One sister represented the mind, the other the will. Lyra, as the eldest, seemed to represent the heart. Together, they formed a complete circle of their culture. He understood now that this marriage was not about romance, but about unity of strengths. Each sister was a pillar holding up the agreement. Refusing one meant letting the structure fall. Elder Chiron then turned to Daniel and asked for his response. Daniel chose his words carefully. He said, I acknowledge each of you and the duties you carry. I will listen to what must be done before I decide for. I will not enter lightly into an oath that binds two worlds. The elder accepted his answer for now, but reminded him that the decision could not wait long. The law allowed a short period of trials to prove the worth of the representative. This would give him a chance to know each sister, and for them to know him. The trials would also show the council that the union was not forced without care. Neera smiled faintly as if she welcomed the challenge. Arya gave a small nod, approving the fairness of the approach. Lyra's gaze lingered on Daniel, with a look that was both firm and hopeful. Later that day, Daniel was escorted to the living quarters prepared for him. Within the Arvanan enclave, the space was filled with soft light and gentle curves in the walls, everything designed to calm the mind. 3 separate chambers were linked to his own, one for each sister, though they were more like meeting halls than sleeping rooms. This was a place for dialogue, not seclusion. Over the next hours, Daniel learned more about the trials from Lyra. The first would be the trial of understanding, led by Arya. It would test his grasp of Arvanan law, history, and diplomacy. The second would be the trial of courage, under Neera's direction, of physical and mental test in a setting that demanded quick decisions and bravery. The third would be the trial of connection, guided by Lyra herself. It would judge his ability to share trust and empathy across cultural lines. That evening, Arya visited him. She brought with her a large crystal tablet filled with shifting text symbols that reformed into his own language through the translation field. She explained the events of the War of the Four Clans, how betrayal had once nearly destroyed Orvana, and how the law of multiple heir marriage had ended centuries of bloodshed. Daniel listened carefully, asking questions about the structure of their society, the way their clans balanced power, and the role of the Union in keeping the peace. Arya seemed to approve of his interest, though she warned him that knowledge alone would not be enough. The trial of understanding would require him to apply wisdom in unexpected situations. The next morning, Neera arrived at his chamber. Her voice was brisk, and her manner direct. She told him that courage on Orvana was not measured only by the willingness to fight, but also by the ability to stand firm when all odds turned against you. She spoke of sky bridges suspended between the towers of their capital and of the great wind tunnels that roared between them. Her trial, she explained, would take place high above the city with no walls to shield them, and the test would be whether he could move forward when the path was narrow and the drop endless. Daniel felt a twist in his stomach, but met her gaze without looking away. When Lyra joined him later, she spoke less of tests and more of purpose. She reminded him that beyond the politics, beyond the ancient laws, this marriage would be a message to the galaxy that 2 very different worlds could bind themselves in trust. She said that the trial of connection would not be about strength or intellect, but about opening his mind to see her people as his own, and letting them see him as more than just an outsider. Her tone carried no threat, only a quiet certainty that this was the most important trial of all. By the end of the day, Daniel realized he was standing at the edge of something far larger than himself. Earth's fate was tied to his actions, but so was the peace of a world that had once been at war with itself. The sisters were not obstacles, but guardians of their people's future. He lay awake that night under the glow of the twin moons, wondering not if he could pass the trials, but if he could live up to the trust that was slowly forming between them. Morning of the first trial came with the soft glow of the twin suns peeking through the crystal windows of the Arvanan enclave. Daniel rose early, his mind restless with thoughts of the challenges ahead. The trial of understanding led by Arya would begin within the great library of Orvana, a place that was said to hold every record from the last 1,000 years. He dressed in the formal robe, given to him the deep gray fabric marked with the crest of earth on one shoulder and the symbol of House Varen on the other. Lyra and Nira were already waiting near the entrance to wish him fortune, though Nira simply smirked and told him not to embarrass himself. The library was unlike anything Daniel had seen before. Tall arches soared into the air, lined with shelves made not of wood or metal, but of a translucent stone that seemed to breathe with faint light. Each book or crystal tablet floated gently in place, moving toward a reader when called by voice. Arya stood in the center, her pale robe flowing like water. She welcomed him with a nod and explained the rules of the trial. He would be given a scenario drawn from Orvanan history, but with missing details. He must use the knowledge provided and his own reasoning to solve the problem in a way that preserved peace between the clans. The scenario unfolded before him as the walls shimmered into a living vision, showing two clans on the brink of war over the rights to a river that ran through both territories. The river had run dry due to environmental collapse, and each clan blamed the other. Daniel asked questions, studying the customs of water rights, the trade history, and the long list of past disputes. Slowly he crafted a solution, proposing a shared rebuilding of the river's source using technology and resources from both sides, while giving each clan equal honor in the work. Arya listened in silence, then nodded with approval. She said the true event had ended in decades of hostility because no one proposed shared honor. His answer showed he could think beyond simple victory or defeat. The trial was passed the next day, was for the trial of courage. And Nira wasted no time in making her expectations clear. They met at the edge of the sky bridges above Orvana's capital. The city towers rose like spears of glass and metal into the bright air, while the wind roared between them. The bridges were narrow paths of woven crystal strands barely wide enough for 2 feet, and there were no rails to hold. Nira explained that they must cross 3 bridges, each more unstable than the last, while carrying a small orb of living light. The orb was delicate and would fade if shaken too much, making the crossing fail. Daniel felt the wind pull at his robe and hair, but stepped onto the first bridge, following Nira's steady pace. The second bridge swayed heavily, forcing him to shift his weight carefully. At one point, a sudden gust made him stumble, and the orb trembled in his hands. Nira stopped ahead and called out to focus on his breath and the next step rather than the drop below. By the time they reached the third bridge, Daniel's legs ached from the tension. The final crossing was angled upward toward a tower with a sharp wind cutting across it. Halfway, the gust nearly pushed him to his knees, but he pressed forward, holding the orb close to his chest. At last he stepped onto the tower platform, and the orb glowed brighter in his hands. Nira gave him a rare grin, saying few outsiders crossed without losing the light. She declared the trial passed. For the final trial, Daniel met Lyra in a quiet garden suspended high above the city. The floor was made of smooth white stone, and small streams of water ran between shaped islands of green. The air was calm here, free from the winds of the sky bridges. Lyra explained that the trial of connection was not about tasks or physical skill, but about opening one's thoughts to another. She invited him to sit across from her and placed between them a small silver sphere. She told him to rest his hands on it and let his mind speak without words. The sphere began to glow faintly. As Daniel thought about Earth, about his family, about the cities lit by the night sky, he thought of the struggles of his people to reach the stars, and the hope that had carried them forward. He let himself feel the uncertainty of being far from home and the quiet fear of failing not just himself, but the world he represented. Lyra's eyes softened as the sphere pulsed brighter. She shared her own thoughts in return, the weight of leading her clan, the fear that the old conflicts might return, and the hope that the marriage would not be a chain but a bridge. Daniel felt the line between them blur for a moment as If they were standing in the same memory, seeing through each other's eyes, when the sphere's light finally faded, Lyra spoke, quietly saying the trial was past, not because he had proven strength or cleverness, but because he had allowed honesty to guide his thoughts. She told him that many leaders hid behind formality and pride, but he had shown a willingness to be seen. Without a shield, the council later confirmed that all 3 trials were completed successfully. The news spread quickly through the summit halls, drawing the attention of allies and rivals. Alike, yet as Daniel left the garden with Lyra, a shadow of unease followed him. In the distance he saw 2 delegates from a rival faction speaking in hushed tones. Their eyes followed him as if measuring his every step. Daniel remembered that some worlds would prefer Earth fail to join the Union. He wondered if they would try to turn the law itself against him. Still, for now, he had earned the trust of the sisters, and with it a path forward. The trials were over, but the true test of the alliance had only begun. The days following the trials were filled with quiet preparations for the wedding that would seal the treaty. Daniel found himself moving between meetings with the council and moments spent learning more about Orvanan customs. Lyra guided him through the ceremonial steps that would take place under the twin suns. Arya explained the political structure that would shift once Earth became an official ally, and Nira spoke about the defense agreements that would give both worlds protection. Yet beneath the steady rhythm of these days there was a growing sense of unease. One evening, as Daniel walked through the upper corridors of the summit hall, he overheard voices from a narrow side chamber. The low tones carried a sharp edge, and though the words were not in his own language, the translation field whispered their meaning. They spoke of making the human fail before the final signing. They spoke of presenting evidence to the council that he had insulted Orvanan tradition so deeply that the law would be void. Daniel leaned closer, but a sudden footstep behind him made him turn, and the voices stopped. When he looked back, the chamber was empty. The next morning the council summoned him without warning. The great hall was quieter than usual, and the air felt heavy. Elder Chiron sat with a sealed crystal tablet before him. He announced that a formal complaint had been filed against Daniel, accusing him of mocking Orvanan marriage rites during a private meeting. The complaint claimed witnesses had seen him speak of the union as a burden and laugh at the customs. The council stated that if the charge was proven true, the marriage could not go forward and the treaty would be lost. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. He had said nothing of the sort, but he could see in the faces of some delegates a flicker of satisfaction at the accusation. Before he could speak, Lyra rose from her seat. Her voice was calm but firm. She asked the council to allow the accused and the heirs to investigate the claim before any judgment was made. Chiron, after a pause, agreed, but warned that the investigation must be swift and conclusive. With permission granted, Lyra, Arya, and Nira gathered with Daniel in the privacy of the enclave. Nira was the first to speak, saying she had suspected interference from the rival faction since the trials. Arya suggested that the complaint might be supported by falsified recordings, since Orvanan translation fields could be manipulated if one had the skill. They began their search in the lower archives, where council recordings were stored. Each archive chamber was guarded, but Lyra's position as an heir gave them entry. After hours of scanning data, they found a sequence labeled as evidence against Daniel. In the image, Daniel appeared to be speaking in a small meeting room. His words through the translation field mocked the tradition, calling it outdated and impractical. Yet Daniel remembered the real conversation in that room. It had been with a group of young delegates about the balance between ancient law and modern life. He had spoken with respect, not mockery. The tone had been altered, and sections of speech had been cut and rearranged. Arya's hands moved quickly over the controls. She traced the data signature to a council office linked to the rival faction, known for opposing Earth's membership. Nira's expression hardened as she said, "They would not sit back while such dishonor was used to break the treaty." They decided to present the findings directly to Chiron before the council could vote. When they arrived, Chiron examined the altered record beside the untouched original and the tracing data. His voice was slow but certain when he said the evidence was clear. The complaint was false. The council would be informed, and those responsible would answer for their actions with the false accusation destroyed. The path to the wedding was clear, but the sisters still gathered with Daniel in the garden. That evening the air was quiet, except for the soft ripple of water through the stone channels. Lyra told him something she had not said before. The law that demanded he marry all heirs also allowed for voluntary annulment after the first year. If either side chose to part ways, the alliance would remain, but the personal bond could be broken. She said this not to give him a way out, but so that his choice would be made in full knowledge. Daniel stood in silence for a long moment. The thought of leaving after a year might have comforted him once, but now it felt hollow. He had come to see Lyra, Arya, and Nira not only as political partners, but as people who had trusted him with their future. He remembered Arya's steady wisdom guiding him through the trial, Nira's fierce will pushing him across the wind-swept bridges, Lyra's open honesty in the garden. He realized that what had begun as an obligation had turned into something he chose for himself. He told them that if he accepted this marriage, it would be because he wanted to stand with them, not because the law demanded it. Nira gave a small approving nod. Arya's eyes softened with quiet satisfaction. Lyra smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, there was a trace of relief in her face. They all knew that the final ceremony would not simply be the closing act of a treaty, but the beginning of a shared path. For Daniel, it was no longer about surviving the demands of an alien law. It was about building something that could last across the stars. That night, as the lights of the city glimmered below and the twin moons cast silver light across the balconies, Daniel prepared for the day ahead. The sabotage had failed, but the memory of it lingered as a warning that not all would welcome the union. Still, he felt ready for whatever came next, for in the trials and the trust that had grown between them, he had already found his place beside the sisters of House Veyrind. Day of the wedding rose bright under the twin suns of Urvana, casting gold and silver light across the capital towers. The entire city seemed alive with movement as banners of deep blue and silver hung from every bridge and balcony. The great ceremonial plaza had been transformed into a vast open court with a central platform of white stone polished to a mirror's shine. Around it, the council members and delegates from dozens of worlds had gathered, their robes and armor glimmering in the light. Above them, the sky was filled with drifting petals released from high platforms, each one carrying the symbol of House Veyrind and the crest of Earth. Daniel stood at the edge of the platform wearing ceremonial robes unlike any he had worn before. The fabric was woven from Orvanan crystal threads that caught the sunlight and shimmered in soft waves. The crest of Earth rested over his heart, while the sigil of House Veyrind flowed across his back. Lyra, Arya, and Nira approached from the opposite side, each wearing robes that reflected their roles. Lyra's was deep blue with silver markings like ripples of water. Arya's was pale white marked with lines of starlight. Nira's was crimson with black edging like the horizon at sunset. The music began, a low hum that grew into a steady rhythm joined by the chime of crystal instruments. The sound carried across the plaza and into the high balconies above. Elder Chiron stepped forward to open the ceremony. His voice was strong as he spoke of the history that had brought them here, the centuries of division that had once scarred Orvana, the wisdom that had forged the law of unity, and the rare moment when two worlds met not as strangers, but as partners. He turned to Daniel and spoke the first question: do you stand here by your own will to bind your life to the heirs of House Veyrind, knowing the duties and bonds this will bring? Daniel answered clearly, I do. Chiron then turned to Lyra, Arya, and Nira, asking if they would accept Daniel, not as a tool of alliance, but as a partner in the shaping of their people's future. All three answered together, we do. The elder then lifted the ceremonial chains of light, thin ribbons of energy that linked to crystal clasps. He placed one between Daniel and Lyra, another between Daniel and Arya, and the third between Daniel and Nira. The light shifted through colors as each clasp locked a sign that the bond was recognized by Orvanan law. As the vows were spoken, Daniel felt the strange quiet weight of the moment. He promised to stand beside them in peace, and in struggle to learn their ways and protect the bond they had chosen. They promised to guide him in their customs, to guard his world as they would their own, and to face whatever might come with unity. When the final vow was spoken, the chains of light dissolved into bright sparks that rose into the sky, disappearing into the sunlight. But before the ceremony could close, a sharp cry rose from the edge of the plaza. A group of figures moved forward. Breaking through the gathered crowd, their armor was marked with the colors of the rival faction. Daniel recognized the leader as one of the delegates who had filed the false complaint. The man stepped onto the lower steps and raised a device in his hand. He shouted that the marriage was a deception, that the human had been forced, and that the alliance was a trap meant to weaken the union. The crowd stirred with unease. Elder Chiron raised a hand for silence, but the man pressed to control on the device, releasing a pulse of static through the air. The ceremonial shields flickered, and Demednera was the first to move, placing herself between the intruders and the platform. Arya stepped to Daniel's side, speaking calmly to the crowd, explaining the sabotage they had already uncovered. Lyra called for the council guards, and at the same time spoke directly to the gathered worlds, reminding them of the trials Daniel had passed and the dangers he had faced, not as a prisoner of the law but as one who chose this path. The intruders, realizing their words were losing power, tried to push forward, but the guards surrounded them within moments, and the device was taken. Elder Chiron addressed the assembly again, speaking with authority. The attempt to disrupt the union had failed, and in its failure had proven the strength of the bond formed here today. The crowd responded with a wave of sound, part applause, part the deep hum of Orvanan approval. The elder then declared the marriage complete and the alliance unbreakable. The plaza erupted into celebration as streams of colored light shot into the sky and petals rained down in shimmering spirals. Daniel turned to Lyra and Nira, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift from his shoulders. They stood together on the platform as the music swelled and the light of the twin suns bathed them in gold and silver. Faces in the crowd no longer looked at him with suspicion, but with recognition. As one of their own, he thought back to the moment when Lyra had first spoken of the law and how impossible it had seemed. Then to the trials where each sister had tested him in her own way. Then to the night in the garden when he had chosen this path, not because the law demanded it, but because he believed in what it meant. As the celebration spread through the plaza, Daniel realized that the union was more than a treaty. It was a living promise carried by 4 people across the gap of 2 worlds. It was not a perfect ending, because life among the stars was never simple, but it was a true beginning built on trust and choice. The sisters each placed a hand on his arm, and together they stepped down from the platform into the crowd, greeting those who came to honor the moment. The stars above were still distant, yet somehow they felt closer, as if the universe itself had taken a step toward them. And as night fell over Orvana, the lights of the city reflected off the high crystal towers, and the people of 2 worlds celebrated under the same sky. The path ahead would be long, but it would be walked together, bound not just by the law of the union, but by the bonds they had chosen to make. Their alliance was no longer a matter of survival alone. It was a family formed across the stars, and it would carry them into whatever future awaited the end.